I'm Scott Salyer. I'm a VMware employee. And this is David Welch. I'm delivering the SQL Server portion. David will deliver the Oracle portion. The standard disclaimer, we don't have anything currently under development, no product features to worry about, no non-disclosure to worry about. So this is all pretty standard stuff. So my current position at VMware is Director of Global Systems Engineering Enablement. So I'm kind of in the training arm of the company now. I've been with VMware for 10 years, started in May of '07. I've been a 10-time consecutive speaker at VMworld. I used to do a lot more technical stuff around like Exchange and SQL Server. Now I kind of stuck with licensing because I lost my technical skill. But still know this. Prior to that, I had 20 years experience in enterprise architecture and also Microsoft applications, including SQL Server. I did AD. I did identity and access management with things like Tivoli and Exchange. And most of the Microsoft white papers you see on VMware.com, I either wrote the original or co-authored. And I'll pass it over to Dave for his intro.
I like that, Scott. I stick with licensing because I've lost my technical skills.
Pretty much.
I think I resemble that remark.
Pretty much.
All right, Dave Welch with House of Brick Technologies. Within House of Brick, I have various titles. I really don't know that any of them are relevant other than that I am I am House of Brick's Oracle Licensing Practice Lead. I've got an interesting history. I had the honor of giving the world's first Oracle on VMware presentation at VMworld in 2007, no typo, and have been speaking annually ever since. Long history as a mission-critical Oracle RAC, Oracle Parallel Server Production DBA, and happy to be affiliated with House of Brick that pretty much kicked off the industry in terms of mission-critical Tier 1 Oracle workloads on VMware. So, back to you, Scott.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, a little bit about House of Brick. I'll talk more about this later as appropriate, but we are the grandfather and the pioneer having to do with these workloads. Probably about 70% of our revenue is Oracle-based, about 30% is SQL Server, and a little bit of other relational database-based. We do an incredible amount still to this day of RISC Unix to vSphere x86 replatforming. We have a very substantial managed services line, including this group would be interested or should be interested in, a managed license support services line that we'll talk about more later on, hybrid cloud, on-prem cloud, and quite a few public-facing white papers with a massive amount of free information having to do with exactly how to architect and license those environments. Enough having to do with House of Brick for the moment.
So here's some of the things that are being offered here. We have 30 breakout sessions and 2 panels and 3 quick talks on virtualizing applications. Virtualizing applications is a big deal to our company. We know that the app drives, the business need, or the business need drives the app, which drives the infrastructure, and that's what we try to espouse. We got 10 BCA Meet the Experts sessions, 2 birds of a feather, 5 group discussions. So a bunch of stuff been going on this week around applications. Make sure that you get a chance to attend those. The other slide that we have in here is showing the growth of virtualized applications over the last few years. When I first started at VMware, the VMware product managers told me, we can't virtualize Exchange, it's too big. So over the years, we were able to prove that wrong. We were able to virtualize bigger and bigger workloads. And as a result, you see that, especially Microsoft SQL, we're looking at 81% of respondents say that they run SQL in a virtualized environment. So where can you learn more? There's our Business Critical Applications homepage on VMware.com. We have a VMware Dell EMC site. We have several blogs. So you guys will have access to these after the session. 2 things I want to call out here before we get into the meat of the presentation. And I want to read this verbatim because it's important. All software vendors deserve the total licensing fees that the individual contracts that the customers of those vendors have signed require.
Amen.
Secondly, VMware recommends to all VMware customers that they adhere to the specifics and fulfill their responsibilities of all their third-party contracts. What we're presenting to you today is an opinion. It's a well-informed opinion, but it's an opinion nonetheless. Make sure that you verify everything with your Microsoft rep before you make a decision. Or Oracle rep, sorry. So without further ado, licensing SQL Server on vSphere. As I said before, always follow Microsoft documentation. I've linked the licensing guide, the virtualization guide, and the product licensing page up there. You got some previous versions if you're interested in those. There are essentially two production licensing models. You've got Server Cal. It's only for standard edition, by the way. There used to be an enterprise Server Cal, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And Server Cal is a relatively low-cost server license, but then you have a client access license for every user or device connected to that server or any other server. The second way of licensing is per core. And per core is when you don't know which users are going to access the server. Like say, if you're on the internet or you've got thousands of users and you don't know who's going to access it, per core licensing will take advantage of that because you don't require any client access license at all. So per core works for all editions and is the only option for enterprise if you're buying new. With per core, you get a 1 VM per core limit without software assurance. So in other words, it doesn't matter how many virtual CPUs I have in that VM. If I have a 16-core server, I can have 16 VMs on that server if I don't have software assurance. Software assurance gives me unlimited VMs. We'll talk about why that's important to license mobility here in a little bit. So the third principle is that when virtual machines move, licenses don't necessarily move with them. In fact, this is the unique issue with virtualizing databases. Okay, so we used to have, back in the 90s, early 2000s, companies tried to do this follow the clock licensing. And this was way before VMware was really a factor. What companies would do is they would apply their licenses to the US. At 5 p.m. they'd transfer those licenses to APJ. At whatever time they'd transfer those licenses to Europe. And so Microsoft came up with the idea of license mobility restrictions, which says I can only move a license from one physical server to another once every 90 days. This was pre-virtualization. Now, as virtualization comes on the scene, you can see where that might cause a big problem. Now I'm trying to vMotion. I can only vMotion once every 90 days. We used to call it the vMotion tax. So Microsoft has, with software assurance, they have given us rights called license mobility. And what license mobility allows us to do, if we have a software assurance subscription, depending on the case, we can move a VM to any other host within the data center. And they've waived that 90-day restriction. So if you don't have SA, you have to closely monitor where those workloads go. If you have SA, you can eliminate vMotion accounting, and basically, if you're kind of caught up in an audit, SA covers you to move that VM anywhere within the data center. And I think a data center is defined as being within 4 time zones or so of each other. So the 90-day restriction still applies if I want to move a SQL Server VM from the US to Sydney, let's say. But as long as you're within a certain set of time zones, you can move those an unlimited number of times. Now, without SA, you can vMotion to another host, provided that that second host has sufficient licenses to catch that VM. We'll cover that in the enterprise licensing. So, Server Cal licensing, this is the simplest model. As I mentioned, it's only available in Standard Edition. If you have a previous Enterprise Edition Server Cal model that you've been grandfathered under and you have software assurance, you can use your existing CALs, but you can't purchase new ones. By the way, those Server Cal Enterprise Edition licenses are premium. People are like selling those because they're so valuable. A CAL entitles each user or device to access an unlimited number of SQL servers. So let's say I've got a small company, I've got 3 users, and I've got a device that has task workers that log in every day. In this case, I would only have to buy 4 client access licenses, and no matter how many SQL Server VMs I deploy, those guys can access that legally. So Server Cal is great for environments with few users, or let's just say users that are easy to count. VM-based licensing only allows, well, you can only license the VM if you're running VMware. You can't license the host and put a bunch of VMs on that licensed host. So the operating system environment, or OSE as Microsoft calls it, which would be equate to a VM, has to have a license per VM. So if I had a host with 4 VMs on it, I need 4 server licenses for those VMs. Lastly, software assurance allows me license mobility for any SQL servers that are licensed in the Server Cal model. The second way of licensing, and probably more common, is the per core licensing. And you can do that one of 2 ways. You can license per core by virtual machine, or you can license per core by physical hosts. We'll do the virtual machine first. So when you license by virtual machine, you're actually applying to the license to that OSE, or operating system environment. You need a core license for each virtual core. If you're hyper-threaded or not hyper-threaded, it's irrelevant. Whatever the VM sees as the number of virtual cores, that's what you have to license for. So we start with a minimum 4-core license per virtual machine. So at minimum, you need 4 cores license, period, for every VM. And then as you increase the number of virtual cores, you add licenses in 2-core increments. The advantage of this, it's pretty profound, because if I apply the license to the VM and I have software assurance, now I can move anywhere in the server farm. I don't have to really account for licenses on the host. VMs can move freely. I have easier license accounting. And also, if I have mixed workload clusters, like if I don't want to dedicate 2 or 3 hosts to SQL, I just want them to run kind of out in my private cloud, it's an excellent system for that. The disadvantage, and the only real disadvantage, is the low utilization of the VM can result in unused license capacity. So if I've got a VM that's only doing 1 core worth of work, and I have to apply a 4-core license to that VM, I get no savings. In fact, it's inefficient. So it depends on what's more important to you. Is it more important to not account for vMotion and let that VM move wherever it wants in the environment? Or is it more important to consolidate and save on license costs? That is up to you. Yes, sir? Is
there any limitation to how far it can move? Like if you move it from production to DR, which is 2 time zones away, or any?
I forget the number of time zones. I think it's 4 time zones. But I will have to verify that afterwards, but basically within the same geo. Yeah. So they've eliminated data center for SQL. The highest you can get on SQL is enterprise. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay. So let's do a per VM licensing example. When would I use this? So in this case study, Rainpole Bank has 50 VMs. 5 of those VMs are running SQL. 4 of the SQL servers are in basic availability groups. We have 1 standalone. Each SQL server has 4 vCPUs, and monitoring shows a healthy 70% utilization of each VM during peak hours. So it's well utilized. Each ESX host has 32 cores. So as you can see, we only have about 20 cores worth of SQL Server. It's not going to fill an entire host. Best solution here, since I can't fill an entire host, I should license by VM, spread those VMs across multiple ESX hosts for availability purposes, purchase SA, which will let me move anywhere in the farm. So let's look at the high density option. So this is where we apply the license to the host instead of the VM. And it offers us a number of advantages around consolidation. So what we do here is we license all the cores on the host, and in this case, each host has 8 cores, because it was easy. I didn't want to put 32 cores down there. So each host here has 8 cores. Without SA, remember what we said earlier, I can only have 8 VMs on each host. So I'm limited by the number of cores on the host as to how many VMs I can have. So that's one thing. And those VMs can have any number of virtual CPUs. So let's say without SA, I wanted to move a couple of VMs to another host. So I've had to license all 8 cores on each host, and on host number 3, I only have 6 VMs. Even though I don't have SA, I can move the 2 VMs from host 2 to host 3 because I have slots. I'm calling them slots. That's not an official term. But I have licensing slots available for that VM to move. That's the only example you can really, you don't have to worry about license mobility between 2 servers, is if you have all the servers fully licensed and there's room on one of those servers. With SA, that changes the ballgame. That gives us unlimited operating system environments. We don't care if there are slots on the server. We can move everything from server 2 off to servers 1 and 3, and because I have unlimited rights, you know, the license doesn't move with the VM, but it doesn't have to in this case. So let's look at the per host licensing example. So Rainbow Bank again, this time we have 500 VMs. 50 VMs are running SQL, 16 of those are in always-on availability groups, 34 standalone. The SQL Server VM is configured between 4 and 16 CPUs, but when we monitor, we only see about an average of 30% utilization of the VMs. ESX host has 32 physical cores, and they're running hyper-threading. The best solution, use Enterprise, license all the physical cores on the ESX host. We recommend that you either dedicate a group of machines as a cluster to SQL, or that you carve out 2 or 3 hosts within a cluster and use host affinity to keep your SQL Server VMs on those licensed hosts. You spread your AAG across multiple ESX hosts to maximize your availability. You purchase software assurance that gets you unlimited VMs per host. Now it effectively grants the VM full mobility to any licensed host in the cluster. You can save a lot of money doing that. So let's look at an example. Your mileage may vary, but in this example, our physical SQL servers are only 15% utilized. Right now, we're licensing 16 cores per server, total of 160 cores. Now, I'll point this out at the bottom. Costs are illustration only, do not reflect current pricing, okay? But in the old pricing model, it might have cost me $1.3 million to license those servers when you account for the server cost, 160 cores worth of enterprise license, and SA. But if I'm only 15% utilized, I could increase my utilization through consolidation. So I move all those 10 servers over to 2 ESX hosts. They are now 75% utilized. I'm only licensing 32 cores, and I'm saving 70%. If the SQL Server physical servers were running at 75% utilization already, you would not get that kind of savings. It all depends on utilization of the physical servers. I think I've got a couple slides here, and then I'll be finished. So licensing for availability and recovery, a gentleman asked me this question earlier. So for each licensed SQL Server covered by SA, customers can run up to the same number of passive failover instances hosted on premises. So what that essentially means is if I take a SQL Server VM, I license it, I cover it by SA, I'm allowed to have 1 free failover instance on premise. If I have multiple failover instances, I have to pay for 3, 4, 5, and so on. But copy number 2 is free on premise. If I'm going to the cloud, if I've got a SQL Server on premise licensed with SA, and I want to do DR in the cloud, a passive failover instance, I have to pay for both. The third scenario is if I have primary in the cloud and secondary in the cloud, I only have to pay for 1. So it's really kind of odd. Both on premise, I pay for 1. Both in the cloud, I pay for 1. On premise and cloud, I pay for both. And you can check that in the licensing guide. If you're licensing the VM, SA allows you to have license mobility, which allows VMware HA, vMotion, and DRS. And down at the bottom here, we have VMware features and whether or not you'll require a license at the secondary. So for VMware HA, you do not require a license at the secondary host, but if you want to fail back within 90 days, you do. So failover is fine, failing back is where you're restricted. With vMotion, you have to have some kind of license to cover you on both hosts. Fault tolerance, since I'm running both workloads at the same time, I need a license on both hosts. And then for Site Recovery Manager, same kind of thing. If I want to fail over, it's free. If I want to fail back, I need SA. Yes, sir? I'm sorry, say that again?
For the SRM part at the bottom, can you put Zerto or a like application at the bottom to replicate it to your DR and not have to license the DR?
I'm not sure I could answer that question. I'll have to talk to you afterwards and find out more about the software. Okay, so key takeaways, and then I'll get out of the way here. Make sure you analyze the environment and pick the licensing model that's right for your business. They all have advantages and disadvantages. If it's consolidation, if it's motion, whatever you're looking for, you can find the right licensing model. If you're licensing by VM, remember it's a minimum of 4 virtual cores. Make sure that the VM is fully loaded to take full advantage of that license. If you are using basic availability groups or always on, make sure you separate the nodes on separate ESX hosts so you maximize your availability. You don't want them both on the same host and that host go down and now you've lost it all. If you have enough VMs to fill one or more ESX hosts, consider licensing the hosts instead of the VMs. You get a better consolidation, better savings. And then verify everything with your Microsoft rep, as I said before. Again, these are opinions. We've been doing this for a few years, but before you make any big decisions, just talk to your rep, okay? So that is it for me, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave. Thank you, guys.
Well, it for him, but the way that we do this, the way that Scott and I do this, is we have about 20 minutes for SQL Server on VMware, we have about 20 minutes for Oracle on VMware, and then we have a full cumulative 20 minutes of Q&A time reserved. We've used a little bit of that, but most of it's still available. So please be thinking about your very specific scenario, architecture-specific questions that you have. The rest of the group will very much benefit from those questions. So, having to do with SQL Server on VMware licensing, yes, validate it with your Microsoft rep. Having to do with Oracle on VMware licensing, do not. What did I say? They're laughing. Do not validate it with your Oracle rep. I'm glad that you're laughing. You understand. Okay, it's a very different ballgame. All right. The tectonic plates shifted on October 23rd, 2015, when Mars Corporation filed a lawsuit against Oracle. It was the first of its kind in the world, the action. There were 2 issues in that lawsuit. Oracle's attempt to expansively interpret its installed and/or running language was one of those 2 issues. If you're not familiar with this, as often as I want to read the House of Brick blog post on this, I don't even look at the bookmark. I just do Mars versus Oracle in Google. And it's the first entry. It always will be, okay, to get a summary of that. All right. Now let's talk about what the contract actually says having to do with Oracle licensing. The most important thing that you can take from this session is the first sentence in the contract. And as often as I refer to the contract in this session, I'm referring to Oracle's template agreement. It doesn't matter whether your contract is as old as the Hills, OLSA, Oracle License and Services Agreement since the early 2000s, or the latest and greatest Oracle Master Agreement template contract. OLSA in this session refers to the agreement. First sentence, I want you all to memorize it. It's the most important content in my presentation. Processor shall be defined as all processors for the Oracle programs are installed and or running. That's it. There's nothing else anywhere in the integrated governing agreement that amends that language. Installed is either past tense or present tense, depending on the context in which you use it. Running is present tense. There is nothing prospective about your Oracle licensing obligation in your agreement. Nothing. As such, and a gentleman at the beginning of the session told me, well, wow, I'm running my Oracle workloads on a dedicated cluster of 2 vSphere hosts, even though it could well be operationally beneficial for him instead to use a DRS host affinity rule to lock down those Oracle workloads and have servers 3 through 8. Those VMs have one-way deprioritized inbound privilege to the Oracle license cluster, right? Okay. Your license obligation is not enterprise-based. It's not vCenter-based or SAN-based, shared storage-based. It's not subcluster-based. It's not cluster-based. Your licensing obligation is not even server-based. It is processor-based. And your Oracle contract is agnostic to tooling or operations. What tooling or operations, if any, you bring to bear to maintain your obligations and your Oracle license is absolutely none of Oracle's contractual business. Oracle has the right to audit your use of the programs, where those workloads have been and where they are. How you accomplish that is none of Oracle's business. Less than 8 weeks after the filing, Mars Corporation filed a motion with the court, all happened in San Francisco, to dismiss with prejudice. Now, I'm not an attorney, but in layman's terms, dismiss with prejudice means that that plaintiff can never again file that action against that defendant in that jurisdiction. It'd be interesting to know what really happened behind the scenes, but compare the duration of that filing to Oracle going after Rimini Street. And Oracle very clearly felt like it had good merit with its argument. That lawsuit went on for 5 years. Yet the Mars lawsuit, interestingly enough, was out of the way inside 2 months. We are not attorneys, but in our average professional day, somebody at House of Brick is conferring with multiple, if not guiding, multiple legal teams having to do with Oracle and VMware licensing. We're unaware of any legal action filed by Oracle against any licensee in any jurisdiction on the face of the planet, certainly not in North America. If Oracle had any merit whatsoever having to do with its Oracle on VMware expansive interpretation, meaning you have to license things based on a capability, surely, in my opinion, the largest relational database vendor in the world, SQL Server guys might argue that, depending on how we slice and dice it, right? But still, you get the idea. Oracle's pretty big. Surely it would have cherry-picked lawsuits against customers to fire a shot across the world's bow to enforce the, to protect its intellectual property rights. Nothing. The slide's fully animated. That could be the most popular slide that House of Brick has ever written in our years and years. It's not the most important. The most important one's a slide that has the processor definition on it. Most evidently the popular, in my observation. Okay, so I submit to you the fact that 20 months have gone by and counting since the Mars issue was resolved is extremely significant. Oracle is screaming with its silence, in my opinion and observation, that it has no contractual merit whatsoever having to do with its expansive interpretation of the installed and running definition in a VMware environment. The fact of the matter is, you may not have known it, but your contract is actually quite friendly to VMware. Not hostile, it's quite friendly to VMware. Your contract indeed is agnostic to VMware. It makes no reference to virtualization or hypervisors or tooling. All right? So, as a layman, I can think of a lot of metaphors that show how illogical Oracle's assertion is. Just a few of them. We all have the capability to download unkeyed licenses from Oracle Technology Network, and we could spread them on workstations all over our enterprises within hours. Just because we have that capability, because OTN is designed and the software is designed for that capability, does that prospectively obligate us to a licensing obligation for having done so? Of course not. Okay? Cars are designed with capabilities that far exceed what we can legally do with them. Do I, just by virtue of ownership of that car, inherit a prospective obligation for having violated the law based on the design capability? Of course not. We all have the capability to go out on Amazon or any number of shopping sites and in a heartbeat incur significant financial obligations for products or services because we have that capability and it's only a click away. Am I prospectively obligated? Of course not. You know, I have the capability, when I teach my kids to drive, I take them out on 4-lane divided highways with 30 meters of grass in the middle. But I also take them on a 2-lane divided highway that has no tooling, no boundaries, just a 1/16 of an inch of paint. And I tell them, don't cross that line. If you do, it could hurt. But until we do, I have no, just because I'm right there and with a jerk of a wheel, I could do it. I have no obligation with that. Parking lots, you know, am I obligated for every stall in the parking lot because I could park there? Power companies for decades have had the automated capability to transfer power on a moment's notice. Just because the capability's there, are they obligated to pay for that transfer? Not until it happens. Banking with interbank loans, same concept. David Woodard, one of our colleagues, points out that NFS has been out there for 30 years. And it's an Oracle best practice to mount Oracle Homes, e-Business Suite, Apple Top using NFS. Well, just because within a software click I could establish an NFS mount, am I, because of that capability that I haven't yet exercised? How many of you have had your Oracle reps ask you for a core technology license on all those other servers? Show of hands? Really? Okay, let's talk. Anyway, so Sudhir Balasubramanian, are you here, Sudhir? Absolutely brilliant analysis in a blog post that he did on the 4th of January. I was envious. I didn't think of it myself. If Oracle's VMware prospective licensing assertion were true, it would require you to license every existing vSphere host in every data center and cloud, be that yours or a company down the street, as vCenters and SSO domains are not an obstacle to vMotion. And so, by this faulty logic, you would need to license every host in the galaxy. It's brilliant. Sudhir, thank you. Thank you. Oracle's licensing policy documents move through these very quickly. The technical support policies is directly referenced by the contract. You're obligated to it. Processor core factor table, if your license or amendment language on your ordering document, August 2008 or more recent, yes, you're obligated to it. Application licensing table for e-Business Suite bundling, et cetera. Yes, it's integrated into the contract. The famous Oracle partitioning policy document, no. It can be as clear as it wants to be, but it is not referenced in the contract. It is locked out by the entire agreement clause. Its content is not accurate, by the way. Software investment guide, although it's not contractual, there's nothing in it that is not accurate. Licensing data recovery environments is not referenced by the contract. It does have one inaccuracy. It represents that you have to have feature and metric equivalence between production and DR environments. You won't find that anywhere in the contract. You will only find that in the failover clause, which doesn't necessarily apply to DR environments. Oracle Technology Hosting Guide, not contractual, but compatible with the contract. Licensing software in the cloud computing environment. This one's interesting. Although technically not in the contract, it is our understanding that Oracle has indeed obligated itself to this document. So don't check with us on that, check with your attorney. It grants special privileges for what we call privileged cloud environments, AWS, EC2, Amazon, Azure. But there were some very significant negatives introduced to this policy with the January 23rd, 2017 revision. I'll refer you to a wonderful article that Nathan Biggs, our CEO in the front row here, just co-wrote with Pam Fulmer from VMware for the Northern California Oracle User Group newsletter that was just published that discusses that in length, as well as another blog post that we did. All right, now I'm going to do something I've never done before. Pam Fulmer of the law firm VMware shifted the tectonic plates again on July 6, 2017 with a landmark blog post, absolutely landmark. VMware virtualization in the Oracle audit, what every Oracle customer needs to know about the installed and/or running language of the processor definition. This blog post is in a class all its own. I have never seen anything like it. Pam was extremely giving with this post, meaning she gave away a massive amount of free information with no strings attached. I'm going to quote liberally from this post. Pam has reviewed my narrative as well as the stuff that I've skipped, and she's approved it. That said, I'm not an attorney. My motive is for you to be so impressed by the content that you're going to hear that you go out and read it yourself and refer it to other professionals that can validate its content. Here we go, quoting Pam. Would a California court construe the mere possibility of a future event that may never occur as constituting actual use of Oracle software under the governing agreement? We think it highly unlikely. Moreover, Oracle may think it highly unlikely as well, which is why, to our knowledge, Oracle has never filed a lawsuit based on its expansive interpretation of the installed and/or running language against any customer. After defending multiple software audits on behalf of Oracle customers, we are unaware of any lawsuit of any language in the OLSA which would support Oracle's position. Pam, I'm going to step aside for a moment. I think she's entirely too self-effacing. She uses the word multiple software audits that they have defended. If I were Pam, I may have used a different word. I think Pam is entirely too self-effacing. But back to the language. All right. In fact, just the opposite is true. The fully integrated agreement does not contain contractual language or incorporate other documents or URLs related to use of a product like VMware upon which to base such an assertion. Further, to the extent that Oracle is using its limited audit rights to gain access to confidential customer information about servers on which no Oracle software is installed and/or running, a California court could find that such actions constitute a breach of the audit clause as well as an unfair trade practice under California law. This is especially true if Oracle attempts to use the improperly obtained information to threaten license termination in order to pressure its customers to purchase cloud credits or other Oracle software. And to the extent that Oracle succeeds in using its expansive interpretation of the installed and/or running language to move its customers out of VMware, Oracle customers could have a claim against Oracle for intentional interference with contract and unrelated torts and other related torts. Okay. California Civil Code section 1638 provides that the language of the contract is to govern its interpretation if the language is clear and explicit and does not involve an absurdity. Oracle's interpretation of the installed and/or running language cannot be deemed either clear or explicit and, in fact, is absurd. Indeed, just reading Mr. Russell's lengthy and labored three-sentence explanation of what it means to be installed shows the fallacy with this argument. Oracle, as the drafter of the OLSA, had the opportunity and burden to specifically define installed if it wished to interpret it in this manner and not as installed as commonly used in the software industry. It did not do so. Would a court, even if a court were to find the language ambiguous, California law requires that ambiguities be drafted against the drafter of the contract, which is Oracle. And I'll be right back with you. Oracle's position that its programs are installed on any processors where the Oracle programs are available for use, if accepted, would lead to an absurd result because it would require Oracle customers to pay for a licensing fee based on a speculative future event that may never happen. Under California Code, Civil Code Section 1636, a contract must be so interpreted as to give effect to the mutual intention of the parties at the time the contract was signed. Although Oracle's installed and/or running language was in place since the early 2000s, in 2009, when Mars and Oracle entered into their licensing agreement, the present VMware virtualization technology was not in widespread use by customers with their Oracle database, meaning Oracle's interpretation of the installed and/or running language could not possibly have been mutually intended by the parties. If your company has received notice of Oracle audit, or if you have already been audited, do not delay before seeking expert legal counsel to assist you. Likewise, if you've been audited by Oracle and purchased additional software or paid money based upon Oracle's assertions around VMware, you may have legal options to recoup some of those costs. In any event, do not go up against VMware without knowing your legal rights. Oracle, thank you. Boy, Nathan's here for a good reason, all right? Knew he was here, took until now to figure out what it was. What you do not know could and most definitely will hurt you. End of quote from Pam Fulmer. Now, that I may have confused a which for a than is unimportant. You're not to go out and act on what I just told you. I'm trying to motivate you to go out and read the entire post, absorb it, be ready to take the quiz on it. I suggest that you promote it to your core technology colleagues, your management, your business unit application owners, your contracting and procurement, and especially your legal. That's all I have to say about this blog post, but I wish to give it all the emphasis of which I am capable. All right. You've been warned not to go up against Oracle without knowing your legal rights. 3 Oracle audit customers that we have assisted, I just picked them randomly. Tens of millions of dollars of claim on the first 2, according to Oracle's assertion, and yet their actual contractual claim is zeros less. And look at the last one, millions of claim and down to a few thousand of actual claim. All right, so Nathan Biggs says something that I absolutely love. House of Brick has a perfect track record in defending Oracle audits for customers that follow the formula. Very important, okay? Baseline your compliance, do your internal reviews, get assistance. We have a very modestly priced managed license support services that also includes unlimited audit support in the event that it happens. We have been tooling since 1994. We know exactly how much tooling to bring in and what services to bring into our managed license support services. We don't charge you extra money for unnecessary things. So, anyway, unlimited license amendments. We deal with major corporations that have no idea, even though they've got very competent legal and procurement teams, that this is even here. Section C.1.d, after you get off the EULA and go back to a cap deployment right, you have a perpetual financial obligation to never again pay less annual support than the total support stream you paid on the last year of the EULA. that becomes its own financial obligation that is no longer associated with any software quantity or product, even if you're declining your Oracle footprint. That said, in the vast majority of customers, we're able to help them circumvent this. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. The white paper, the definitive white paper on Oracle and VMware licensing, a massive amount of free information in here, co-sponsored by VMware and EMC, Dell. Strong encouragement to pick that up. Sessions, here are other resources, many of which I have already referenced. And then other sessions that are taking place today, two on SQL Server. Do not miss Nathan Biggs and Aaron Fox's 1 p.m. session today referring to the Mars lawsuit against Oracle. Thank you, in this room. All right. And then here are historical sessions that I strongly suggest that you pick up. Please fill out the surveys. We'd like to know how you felt about today's session. There's the copyright and the contact information. All right, so Scott, if I can invite you back up here, let's do some Q&A. SQL Server and Oracle. Please step up to the mic so people on the recording can hear it.
Okay. Actually, I have two questions. One is a quick one. We deal with not only Oracle database, but Oracle middleware. I assume what you're saying about the licensing on Oracle middleware is the same. Because it's the same boilerplate, basically.
Yeah, let's just talk about core technology licensing, generally speaking, is going to be processor-based metric or named user plus metric. The same rules and contractual constraints are absolutely identical for them. Okay. Yeah. If you get into apps licensing that's revenue-based or transaction-based or body count-based, that's a whole different story, right? Okay.
Second question is actually on both Microsoft SQL and Oracle. We're being told by our internal license management teams that, I got loud, that disabling cores in the BIOS does not eliminate the need to license those deactivated cores.
On Oracle, that is absolutely not correct.
Okay.
You can see that your license is not, it's not server-based. Right. Your license is processor-based. Oracle or anybody else has no contractual merit to make that representation to you. You'll also see that in our white paper. You'll see that in the VMware white paper, Understanding Oracle Licensing, Certification, and Support in VMware Environments. That House of Brick over the years has been a major contributor and always a full reviewer of the content of that. Yeah, that's not correct. If you want to take a 16-core server and disable one of the sockets and core disable a few cores in the other socket, and then install an Oracle workload, you're only obligated for the processors after the core processor factor that it is running. Now, I'll leave it to Scott to address the Microsoft side of that.
So I had heard that, and another gentleman asked me that earlier. I did not see that in the Microsoft license, SQL Server 16 licensing doc. It may be in the product usage rights, but I haven't had a chance to research that. So if you email me, I'll make sure that, you know, whether it's in there or not. I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oracle question. I'm at a financial institution, and we run Oracle 12c for our core banking database. Our licensing for Oracle is unique, I think, because we're running an application-specific full-use license, which allows us to deploy unlimited instances on unlimited cores so long as it is used solely for that core banking Oracle database.
As long as you stay within the bundling constraints, yeah. Right. The limited use constraints, that is.
Right. So I wanted to see if you had any feedback for what, if anything, should we be thinking about going forward with respect to that licensing running our institution? Are there any risks that we hadn't thought of, given that we're currently running on Linux on VMware today with our 12c instances?
We see two risks in our day-to-day experience. Number one, people forget what the boundary is having to do with how many schema changes or column additions, et cetera, that they can make. And so they have a tendency to not remember or understand the limited use license constraints. That can make it especially dangerous if they get into the habit of just moving that anywhere, because the moment that they do indeed violate the constraints of the limited use license, and then they have gotten sloppy and just moved it all over the place, as opposed to still managing it as if it is a more costly license, right? So there's a risk that way too. So those two encouragements by way of risk management.
What's Oracle's stance on development or lab instances of Oracle that get spun up and torn down on like a weekly or monthly basis?
Well, it is a fact that there is no limit, there's no frequency gate within the contract how often you can move the Oracle license. You can deinstall an Oracle license from server A and move it to server B, all right? But if you've got a limited number of licenses, you better be very careful to make sure that you don't have a concurrent license thing going on. Ancillary comment to your question is the OTN developer, Oracle Technology Network Developers License can grant you a free license. You don't have patching capability and you don't have support capabilities, but on a workload, on an unlimited number of servers for an unlimited number of developers until such time that any version of that application goes live, at which time the OTN license evaporates everywhere and everything has to be licensed. People that are part of the Oracle partner network may also have limited rights to use pre-production instances without a traditional license.
Okay, thank you.
Very welcome.
In your experience, have you, well, at least from my perspective, I've seen many companies settle because the amount of effort and time is really costly to them to do the audit and kind of defend against this. So have you ever had a situation where companies have been able to recover funding because Oracle's gone after them in such a manner?
Boy, I would certainly refer you to a legal team like Pam Fulmer, who I quoted as saying, if you've been audited by Oracle, and I quote again, and purchased additional software or paid money based upon Oracle's assertions around VMware, you may have legal options to recoup some of those costs.
Okay.
I'm going to restrict my answer to that statement and with a strong encouragement. I would also expand that to say something that Pam didn't say. Organizations occasionally find that they are coerced into signing what was disclosed at VMware Barcelona 2 years ago, somebody that pushed it into the public domain. Declaration of non-migration that establishes certain network boundaries, VLAN boundaries, SAN boundaries, DRS host affinity rules. Oracle signs off on these boundaries, which otherwise it would have no contractual right to have any of that information. And then you contract, you amend your contract such that it now has a prospective licensing obligation. If you ever shift those boundaries or remove them to expose other vSphere servers, you now have a prospective license on those other vSphere servers. Any organization that finds that they have signed that and may feel that they were coerced inappropriately into signing it, I would also strongly encourage them to approach legal counsel because, again, they may well have legal options to review, let's say, that scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent question, thank you.
Could be a silly question this time.
No silly questions. They're all good questions.
Okay, so right now our Oracle workload is on a physical server, and we use a Solidate from Germany for our manufacturing process. Now we are virtualizing that workload, and the way we did is like we have affinity rules in place, and we license the
with a must rule. It's got to be DRS host affinity must rule.
Must rule. So basically 2 hosts, and one is licensed, and one is if it fails, it goes over. So right now, is it okay if it do a vMotion of the VM, or it shuts down because it is not in a fault tolerance or anything?
Yeah, it depends on how many licenses you have. If you have enough licenses, like Scott was talking about, to have both the source and the target licensed concurrently, then sure, go ahead and vMotion it. The problem comes in when you have multiple virtual machines running the same Oracle software. And if I only have enough licenses for one host, and I put that host in maintenance mode, and it begins vMotioning those VMs to the new target, I can't rely on the so-called 10-day rule that allows me to run Oracle software free of charge on an unlicensed server for up to 10 days, because technically those two vMotions are not going to happen in the same instant. And so I am technically going to have a scenario where I've got both. I have a concurrent licensing obligation on both servers, and I didn't have licensing capacity to cover it. So if I only had one VM, vMotion's fine. Because the vMotion does indeed deinstall and reinstall the software. There's no concurrency there. But if I've got multiple VMs, the only technically safe way to do that is a cold move.
Yeah. No, it is only one VM. And
okay.
It is an affinity host has only 2 hosts. So if it goes on one, and if we put it in maintenance mode,
great.
vMotion is okay.
Yeah, vMotion with that single VM, if I've understood what you've told me, is okay, as the 10-day rule would also apply.
Okay.
Yeah, even if you didn't have a license with that with the single VM, well, yeah, either the license that you've described or the 10-day rule would apply because you only have one VM.
Yes. So what is the 10-day rule?
The 10-day rule, I'll give you the current version. It used to be more liberal. States that you can run Oracle Core Technology software free of charge on an unlicensed server for up to 10 cumulative days in a calendar year. And I can't accumulate hours to make a day. 5 minutes on April 3rd, I mark April 3rd off on the calendar. 5 different tests, 17.5 cumulative hours, I mark that day off on the calendar. It has to share the same data center, share a storage file system, share a cluster. I can only have one 10-day rule host per cluster. And when I'm done, I have to fail back. I have to deinstall the software off the target. That's the current, as of Q4 2007, that's the way the template contract is worded, the 10-day rule.
Thank you.
If we run out of time, we're just going to go out in the hall. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left here.
I have a quick update for that gentleman. So I just saw some blog posts where people were audited for masking or reducing the number of processes in the BIOS for SQL. But apparently it's legal to do it for Windows. So that's the latest I have. You're certainly welcome to email me anyway, okay. But the restriction seems to be on SQL, not Windows.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
This question is somewhat related to the previous gentleman's. So Oracle has told us, we've got in our vCenter, we've got a dedicated 2-node cluster for our Oracle Linux VMs that are also running an Oracle database. And they connect to the back end to a NetApp shared storage, as do all of our hosts in that in vCenter, which we've got a bunch. They said we had to license all of them in the anything that was attached to the shared storage had to be licensed.
Shared storage is not a licensing boundary, despite Oracle's representations to the contrary. However, if I could sit down to any of those other servers, and without further configuration, without further mounting, without further mapping or zoning, if I could simply sit down to those servers and go to the command prompt, and I have the Oracle software right there, the Oracle Home available either through the path or in that directory, yes, House of Brick would consider that installed, okay? But just because those servers are attached to the same SAN, but if I haven't done the mapping or zoning to, if the configuration isn't there,
right.
As a DBA, I would not immediately have the capability to export Oracle_SID to some variable name and type startup and see an instance come up. If I don't have any such capability of the command prompt of those other servers, then Oracle's representation is indeed invalid.
Right, and their logic was that, well, if you've got these shared data stores attached to all these nodes, then you could technically vMotion one of the Oracle VMs to an unlicensed host. We
don't license based on a capability. We license based on where the Oracle programs are installed and /or running.
Right.
Which is past tense and present tense. We don't license based on capabilities.
Yeah, we've been pushing back as passively aggressively as we can on that stuff.
Yeah, well, we'd be happy to help you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Having to do with the statement made earlier, House of Brick customers, audit customers that follow the formula find that they are able to efficiently exit their audits in enjoyment of all their contractual privileges. We're out of time, my apologies. Thank you for your time. We'll head out into the hall for further questions.